It's time for part 2 of the series of creating your beginner game number 2. Let's just jump straight into it. We will be coming back to level 1 later on and expanding a little bit upon this and prettying up the level a little bit. But for now we have all the pieces we need to make it work. We have like all the triggers and the platforms and the balls and the possession and the traveling to the next level. So we have enough here for a base at least. So let's go and work on our second level. So for our second level, let's first go to our second level. What we want to do here is we want to have a slightly different puzzle, and we want this puzzle to be connected around a first-person character blueprint, the one that you get in the first-person templates that allows you to shoot your projectile. So what we first want to do is we want to go to add import and add feature content pack and click on first person and add project. That will bring in the base blueprints that pack actually has in it, which is the first person blueprints and things like that. Now, let's go to our blueprints and create a folder here. Let's call it level 2. So in here we can put our level 2 specific blueprints. And one of the things that we want to have in here is a special game mode, because we want to have special settings for this level. So we go to world settings, we have game mode override here, we click on the plus sign, we say we want to have in this level 2. That's what we want to do. I will call this BP game mode level 2. Just to make it super clear. And we open up the BP game mode and we go to our settings on the right hand side where it says our classes. And we want to change our default pawn class to be first person character, like so. Okay, and then we go back to our level and we say it already overrid the game mode when we created it because we pressed the plus sign here, so it should have the information here as well. So it says default pawn class first person character. So this character here that's already spawned in here, we can delete, and we have a player start over here, which is where our player should hopefully be spawning from. So let's do so that we save and we go back to our level 1 map. Now we just want to make sure that we actually get spawned in as a first person character when we're in there. So we'll just trigger these two platform thingies. We get our character, we teleport in, and we see that we're in level 2 and we're in here as the first person character. So that's good. So far so good. Now we can go back to our level 2 and let's expand a little bit upon what we had before. So we want to do something similar yet different from what we did on level 1, which is we want to be able to see what we need to do to proceed forward, but we also want to make sure that we can't actually interact with the teleporter. So if we start off with doing something like this, I put our player start over here, and in case you didn't notice, in the beginning when I dragged it over here it was clipping into the ground, so it says bad size because it doesn't think it can spawn here, so you can just drag it up a little bit above the ground to make sure that it fits. And then we go to this corner over here and make sure that we have a teleporter over here. We will go to the details for this teleporter and say that this teleporter should bring us to level 3. Okay, so for this level what we wanted to do is I was thinking we have some walls which allows us to see through, and we have some other walls which are not see-through but are acting as sort of our barriers of progress that will prevent us from moving forward. So I was thinking we can put up some some different places here where we need to actually shoot our projectiles, and the projectiles need to hit a certain object, and once that object is hit, then it will open up the door and we'll have to go through, let's say, 2 or 3 different such doors before we can get to a point where we can actually see the other character that we need to take possession of, and then shooting our ball on him will instead make sure that we possess that character, and that will allow us to enter the portal. So let's just start with something rudimentary here. Let's bring in a wall. So this wall, for example, we can just drag it in like so. We can make it, let's take our glass again, our glass material, make sure that you have content selected so you get it. That will allow us to see through this wall. And then we need a separate wall which will lower or slide when we activate our object. So here we can actually reuse some of the blueprints we did before. We can actually have a moving platform as our door, or the barrier that allows us to pass through. So we can put something like that in here and just rotate it 90 degrees like so, and then we could scale this one up so that it's like a door, something like that. So let's assume that this is the door that we need to go through. Now we need to find a way to open this door, and we already have made triggers before, so we can put a trigger over here. Let's put it by the wall, and let's rotate that as well, like so. So now we theoretically have a point where we could shoot. Let's actually do this just to test out our functionality before doing anything else. We want to have this trigger activated by our shooting projectile. So we'll open up our first person character, the blueprints. What we will do first is we will go to our event graph and we'll find the fire projectile, the spawn projectile here. It will play a montage, it will play a sound, it will calculate, adjust the directions and stuff apparently, do a line trace, add impulse to location. This is not what I expected it to have. There's no projectile being added here, but that's fine, we'll do it ourselves then. But the thing I wanted us to do here is I want us to remove this sound, because this sound is sort of loud, so we just bypass the sound like so. And let's see here, line traces, add impulses, we don't need any of this really. We want to have a projectile, so we can actually disconnect this for now and like put this to the side. This is not something we will be needing, like so. So to spawn a projectile we need to have a point to spawn from. So we'll just mark the FP gun and add the component. We can make a sphere collision because that is what they normally use, and we'll make the dimensions, I don't know, let's try 0.2. Let's move it a little bit forward, let's try 0.1 instead, something like that. And what we want to do is we want to get it snugly ahead of the barrel. So we will change our snapping so we can get it something like that. Should be okay. Doesn't need to be perfect, but this will be the location where we spawn from. So we'll rename this to projectile spawn location. Something like that. You might notice how the collision sphere is following along with the rifle, and that's just because it is in the hierarchy just below the gun. So whenever the gun is transforming or moving around according to its animations, then the ball is following. So let's continue with actually spawning the projectile. So what we need to do is we need to get the projectile sphere location, and we need to get its world location. Let's see if we can make some space here, like so, and then we use this to spawn our projectile. Right, that's not how it's done. Spawn actor by class, spawn actor from class. And this needs to be of a projectile type. So we need to make a projectile. Let's make a projectile. So we'll make a blueprint of type actor. Call it BP projectile. Now this one needs to have a mesh. We need to have a couple of things here. We need to have a mesh. We need to have a projectile component. So this will be projectile mesh, and we'll use a sphere. Maybe scale it down to 0. Okay. Let's reset that and click the little hang lock. 0.1. There we go, it's smaller. Now we want to add a collision, sphere collision. So we have it encapsulating the whole object. So just scale it down a tiny bit. Making sure that it encapsulates the object, but it's not much more than that. And we'll call that sphere our proximity volume, like so. Then we have the component and type in projectile. Then we have the projectile movement. And we can give the projectile movement some initial speed, let's say 3000. Max speed 3000. That should be 30 meters per second or something like that. Let's make it bounce like the original does. That's probably fine, I think. Let's go back to our first person character and let's spawn this BP projectile. Like so. And now we have the location, but we also need to get the rotation, and the rotation, the direction the projectile needs to be moving, is going to be related to our camera. Because that is where we're looking. So we get rotation, world rotation from this. So then we want to actually combine both the location and the rotation so that we have our transform. So we create, is it make transform? There we go, make transform. So the make transform takes a few inputs. It takes a location, a rotation and a scale, and the scale we can leave at 1, something like that. That is probably enough, I think. Or have I forgotten something? Let's try it out by going to the second level. Let's see, we have our maps over here. Let's save everything. Level 2, we play. So so we're shooting this ball now. It's black, might not be great. There's also a problem with the projectile is falling through the ground. It doesn't have the collision that we need. So let's fix that by going to our projectile, and we go to our mesh, and we choose gold as our metal material for our ball, because gold makes projectiles 50% better. Then we will take our, we'll make sure also it has no collision, but we will make sure that our volume has collision on it, and we will change its collision to be custom. Is there a projectile one here? There does not seem to be. So we want it to block basically everything except for pawn. So we'll overlap with pawn, or pass through pawn and block on everything else, so it can bounce against everything except for pawns. And let's see how that works. That does not work. Let's see if we can find the problem here. This is peculiar. Let's move our sphere collision to be maybe at the top. That's not exactly what I wanted to do. Let's move it, touch it. That's not what I want to do. So feel like there's a setting here I'm missing. I think I'm being stupid. Of course it should probably be the actual mesh itself probably doesn't have a collision. Okay, it doesn't have a collision. So we'll just create one. We choose a simplified sphere collision. Doesn't look, that looks odd. It should hopefully be okay though. We try that. Let's shoot some more. Yeah, it doesn't look great, but that's probably due to the size of the... Actually, it is probably due to this. Let's scale this down. Something like that, maybe. See if that becomes better. And also we probably need to go to our collision, make our sphere, our volume that's around it better, meaning more snug around it, like something like that, 20 maybe. Let's try that. It's not perfect, but it's better anyway. Okay, so in addition to that, I noticed that our scale is off for the sphere. It doesn't look symmetrical, and this is the reason the scale is off here for some reason. Is it because it started like that? I don't know. Let's go 0.1. No, that wasn't good. Let's try 0.2. That looks okay-ish. Let's change the volume to fit it a little bit better as well. So we'll go down to maybe 18, something like that. Lower the sensitivity so I can get closer. It looks very weird to me. Is it because... it's probably because the actual sphere we're using is not good. Okay. Let's abandon and go for a different sphere then. I don't understand why it would be uneven. Oh, wait. Control Z. Let's go back to the sphere we had. Is it because we have scaled the volume is scaled wrong? Okay, at some point we scaled this proximity volume apparently weirdly. So we'll just go back to have it to 0.1 or back to reset it to 1. And we'll now decrease the radius from here to something that fits snugly. So maybe something like that. And now we can lower the size to maybe 0.2, something like that. Okay, now it's not uneven anymore. So that's an issue of like hierarchies being scaled. I didn't notice when I did that. I apologize. Anyway, so that's that. Other than that, we have our actor itself. We want to have an initial lifespan. Let's put in 5 seconds, meaning how long it will live before it's automatically removed from the level. Let's try it out. Looks better. And it should be despawning. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we have that part done at least. Let's proceed to actually shooting our object over there now. Nothing is happening when we're shooting this, and the reason for that is the trigger only reacts to characters. So let's do something about that. So what we can do, if we go into our blueprint for trigger, this is the condition that we have to actually execute the code of interacting with the connected object. We could do something a little bit different with this. We could, because what we want now is we want the character to be able to activate it, but we also want it to be able to be activated by any projectiles that we shoot. Now those two don't actually inherit any similar class unless you go all the way up to actor, because both character and the projectile we made is from actor. But we could still sort of like clump them together by creating a new blueprint. So let's do that in our blueprint folder. So we'll go for blueprints and we'll go for blueprint interface. And we'll call this BPI activate. Now, the thing with this is we get a function here. We can say activate like so. But technically we don't need this. What we can do is we can do we go to our first person. No, we want to have our third person. Where is it? Ah, never mind. We'll start with our projectile. So our projectile here, if we go and add class settings and add the interface BP activate, BPI activate. Now, even if we don't actually have this method implemented, I think we should still be able to use that we have this interface on this class. Let me show you how. So if we go to our trigger, where did I lose my trigger? Let's close that one, triggers over there. What we can say here, if the other actor, and then we type in implement, we can choose an interface that needs to be implemented. And that means basically we can make a check towards this object to see if it has this interface in here. So if we say it has the BPI activate, in it. We'll do like so. We'll remove this for now, and we say we'll continue if it is implementing the interface. Then this should mean that if a projectile hits this overlap and it implements the interface, it is true and it will interact with it. Let's try it out and see if it works. So did we actually connect this with something? Yes, we did with this platform, right? So we shoot this. Let's see if we can. Doesn't seem to work. Let's see if it is a problem with not having implemented the function or not. We go to the trigger and we can make a print here and say interface found, just so we see that this code actually activates or not. Then we can go from there. My aim is not the best. Interface found, it's saying interface found. Okay, so it's not connected to anything, that's the problem. So everything is fine with the trigger. We can go back and hook it up again. Like so, compile and save. So the problem is that we haven't assigned this one to have an object then. So it has connected object none. So this object in the world is the one that we want to connect it with. So we choose this one. We have a movable platform. Save current, we start. Now we shoot this platform if we can. There we go. So now we have our platform moving. Although you notice now that we have an issue with the amount that it's moving. It's moving only part of the way and then going back. And this is to do with our dynamic code that we made earlier, which is taking into account the size of the mesh, but it's not taking into account the scale of the mesh. So we need to go back to our activatable object, spawn object, movable, where is it? There it is. So we need to enhance this code a little bit. So what we want to affect is the amount of units that we're moving in X here. So let's go and get our world scale from this. We can break this because we are only interested in the scale in the X axis for this. So we want to multiply this float by float with the scale and then send that value into our absolute. Let's see how that plays out for us. So now you see it moves the whole platform away before it chunks it back again. So that's working for us now. So now we have the basic functionality that we want to have. So now we can build upon that a little bit. One way we can build upon this is by having yet another projectile actually. So we can make a child blueprint from this projectile. We'll call this no bounds. So the difference between this one and the last one is just gonna be that we tell this one that it cannot bounce. So we uncheck that box. That way we can make some puzzles here where a character has to find a line of sight and actually hit the target to get a object like this to move away. And then we can make another puzzle after that which requires you to actually take the bouncing into account. You can't actually like shoot straight at the trigger. The trigger will be placed in such a way that you have to use the bounce to make sure that the trigger gets hit to open up the door. Now to have these different projectiles available, what we can do is play around a little bit with some logic that we had before. We can make it so that we have a one equipped projectile type at a time. and have some pickups so that a person can go and pick up an ammo type and then change between different ammo types depending on what it needs. So to do that, we can make use of data tables. So if we create a structure to begin with, because the data table needs a structure, we can do something like this. On the blueprints structure, s underscore, and let's call it projectile structure, or not structure as part of the name, but as projectile. And in this we will have, let's say we have a name or a text. We call this the projectile name. Then we'll make a new variable and we'll make it a BP projectile class reference. And then we call that projectile class. So the default will be like base projectile, and we will have the BP projectile as its default value. Just we don't need to set anything, but this is what we can be using. So anyway, we'll create a data table now. We'll find that under miscellaneous, and you choose an S projectile for that, the structure we just created. We name the data table DT projectile types. Now this allows you to scale upon this later on if you wanted to have multiple different projectiles with different properties, like the lifetime or the speed or whatever you might want to have. So then this would allow you to scale more easily. So let's start with adding one row here for this. Let's see, rename, we'll call this no bounce, and we'll say that it should have the no bounce projectile, and we'll say a projectile that does not bounce. Not really a name anymore, but rather a description. So let's change that to no bounce projectile so that we're more accurate with what we're saying. So now you see that we have a data table of this information, and we'll come back to this later on for how we're going to use this. So let us create a blueprint for this pickup that we're going to be having, the projectile pickup ammo type sort of thing. We'll create an actor blueprint, call it BP projectile ammo. We will make a static mesh so we have something visual. Let's call it pickup mesh, like so. And we choose a cube just because. And let's see. We need to have the mesh should not be causing any collision because we need the player to be able to move into it. This is just a placeholder, of course, but when we change it to something else later. And we also want to have a box volume, box collision for the player moving past it. Actually, we probably don't even need that, do we? We can just have the mesh act doubly as that. We can have the mesh work as our let's see here, custom query only, and we'll let it overlap with pawn. And we block everything else. That should be okay, I think. Like so. So this ammo pickup now then should be represented by a data table, basically, a data table row. So one pickup will be one type of projectile. So we'll start off with first doing this. We'll go to the on component begin overlap. So we have that done. We will check if the other actor is a character. If it is a character, that character we want to change the ammo type for. So we'll go to our first person character, which now needs to have it had a bunch of stuff here that we probably didn't need, but now it's here. We want to have its projectile type equipped. Super descriptive. And we'll say that it needs to be of a type BP projectile. And class reference. So that means that we can also put this as a default for the BP projectile. And it means that we can hook this into our spawning of our projectile. So that means that whenever we're shooting, we're gonna shoot whatever this is set to. So if we have some other interactions, set this to a different projectile, it will change whatever projectile we're gonna be shooting. So that's what this will do now. So this will go and say we should actually not cast to character anymore. We need to cast to first person character because we need to access that specific variable. So we get projectile. We set the projectile and we set it to whatever this projectile ammo has as its ammo. So let's say we have variable in this which says projectile ammo type, and we make it of the type BP projectile and also class reference, and we get that and we put that in there. So now we're passing this information over to this one, right? We can also have this one as a default to this one just so we have something. But we want to make use of our data table. So how can we do that then? Well, we can do this. We can make it so when begin play, for example, happens, we can set our ammo type to be of a value from our data table, for example. So get the data table row. We can do something like so. We can say our data table that we've created. Now we have only one available here, of course, but we break this result, and from that we have the projectile name and projectile class, so we can set our projectile ammo type if it is found, for example. This is one way we can do it. The problem here is that in this specific case we have this already chosen, which is problematic in this case because we don't have this name available exposed outside. So if we were to drop this ammo type into the world like this, we don't have any way to like say that this specific ammo type should be of the no bouncy type or the bouncy type or something like that. One way we can work around that is by creating an enum. So if we go to blueprints and enum and we say e projectile types to sort of match what this data table is called, what we need to do here is we need to make sure that the row name that exists here is the name that we're gonna be making into our enum. So we named the first one no bounds. So if we name this one no bounds, like so, that means we now have a enum in here which corresponds to a data table row in here by its key, which is the row name, and we can make use of that. So if we go back to our projectile ammo and we make a variable that says projectile ammo project, I'm missing letters here. I'm spelling everything wrong also. Like so. There we go. And let's call this an enum so we can distinguish it easily. So we take the E projectile type, like so. And then we click on the I. So now it's exposed, which means we can go over here now and choose a projectile type right on the pickup. And then we go back to the blueprint and we can say, based on our projectile type, we can say toString, and we get the one that's user-friendly. And you can see it can be used like so. So that means that we can use an enum on the outside on a specific instance of an object, and then when that object is created in the world, it will find its data from the data table, it will find whichever class it's connected to, and then it will use those settings to set its class here, which will then in turn be, when it's overlapped by a first person character, be sent to that specific character, which will in turn cause it to shoot that specific ammo type when it's using its fire input action. So let's see if this works then. So we have no, we want to do this. Okay, so it has the no bounds, and we know by default that we have the bounce one. So let's see if this works. Also, we didn't. Actually, we might have done that. So we shoot, and the shots are being bounced. Okay, we walk into the cube. Now we should theoretically have been replaced our ammo type with the no bouncy one. So it's just stopping whenever it reaches a destination. So now we see that that actually works. So now we have made use of data tables as a way of storing data and functionality. So now if we wanted to add something here, we can actually do a new row, and we can call this new one, we can call this bounce, like so, and save that, and we will need a new blueprint for our projectiles. We'll just create a child here and we'll call this one bounce. This will have the exact same parameters as the parent because it has bounce by default. That's how we made it. But we make a child here just to distinguish it. So now we have the bounce one here, and we say bounce projectile, like so. So now the data table has been updated with a new type. Now we need to go to our enum and make sure that we have a field here that corresponds to our key fields, which was bounce in this case, which means that we have now put in a new way of picking up items. So if we do a new projectile ammo over here, and we say that this is the bounce one, this means we theoretically should now be able to go in and like have bounce bullets, then we go in here, and we have now the no bounce bullets, then we go in here, and we now have bounce bullets again. So you can alter between different abilities. And this gives you the freedom to fairly easily and fairly quickly scale new functionality by just creating a new class, putting it to the data table, putting an enum in, and everything else is set up to just work with it. Now, something we have broken in the meantime while we've been doing this is if we go back to our first level, we press play. You can see that if we walk on our triggers now, nothing happens anymore. And the reason for this is we changed how the triggers work. The triggers now only trigger the object they're connected to if whatever is colliding with them, or the volume it has, is something that implements the interface of activate. And currently our third person character is not a class that has that. So let's go into our third person character and our class settings and add our interface that says activate. And again, despite not having the interface actually used here, we don't implement the actual functionality. Just by having this interface on the class allows us now to spawn and move these items around like so. And now we can go over here, and now we can shoot over here, and we can change our bullet types. Now we can change our bullet types again. Okay, so we've come some way now. Let's see how can we expand upon this. Let's go back to our level 2, like so. So let's say that the different ammo types that we have right now are good enough for the puzzle bits. We'll just create one more for the last part, which we will call BP Projectile Possess. And this will be the projectile that we need to actually possess a player then. So we will add another data table entry. We will rename it to Possess. We will change the type to the Projectile Possess, and then we'll say it's the Possess Projectile. Save and close out that one. Then we'll go to the enumerator, add another one called Possess. Like so, and then we'll close that one out. And then we'll go into the Possess one and we'll say that we want to have this one to be able to possess a player that it hits. So we haven't done anything like that. Okay. So on the projectile proximity volume, what are we handling? We're ignoring pawns. Let's say that we overlap pawns instead. And let's say that we have a component begin overlap, and we check if the other actor is a character. And if it is a character, we get player controller. And when we have the player controller, we'll say possess, and we'll possess whoever we have hit. So let's try that out. So first we need to put in a ammo projectile that is going to be of our type possess. And other than that, we're gonna need a character to be able to possess. So let's put in our third person blueprint character over there. Something like that. Let's try this out. So we walk over here. This shot. There we go. It was a shot that acted exactly like the original one, since we didn't change any parameters on it, but it has the ability to possess a character, which the other ones should not have. So if we go and test it out, the default one doesn't do anything, the one that sticks doesn't do anything. It's only this one that has the possess ability that allows you to possess. The other ones will actually pass through, because like you saw on the projectile volume here, we had on the collision settings, we actually had to ignore pawn on the parent and therefore also the other children, except for this one which has this property. So now we have the three different types. Two that will allow us to do some simple puzzles, and one that will allow us to possess the character. So all that remains here is basically just creating the different puzzles. So just like the first level, we have now completed all the functionality that we want. So we will move on to the third level and come back to this and complete the build and pretty it up later on. This is the end of part 2. I hope to see you in part 3. Keep on learning.